For over a century, the sun never set on a global hegemony sustained by naval supremacy and the illusion of absolute invincibility. At the absolute center of this power in the east sat a diamond of colonial engineering, an island heavily fortified to project unchallenged authority across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This was the Gibraltar of the East, a bastion built to withstand any maritime siege and secure the wealth of an entire hemisphere. Yet, in just 70 days, this crown jewel would be violently ripped from the imperial diadem, shattering the psychological foundations of global colonialism forever. What happens to a world order when its most impenetrable fortress falls not to a superior armada, but to a rapid, jungle-bound assault that its architects deemed impossible? The collapse of this specific stronghold in early 1942 was not merely a military defeat, but a seismic fracture in the bedrock of a centuries-old empire. Singapore anchored the British Empire in Asia, safeguarding lucrative trade routes and projecting an aura of racial and technological superiority that kept millions of colonial subjects in line. The island was the linchpin of a massive strategic doctrine designed around a colossal naval base that could host the largest dreadnoughts of the Royal Navy. If this bastion held, the empire endured. If it fell, the shockwaves would inevitably tear the fabric of imperial rule to shreds, accelerating a process of decolonization that would redraw the map of the modern world. Decades of planning had culminated in a fatal miscalculation by high command in London. The defense of the island was predicated on a fundamental assumption that any adversarial strike would come directly from the sea, where heavy coastal artillery could obliterate approaching fleets. The dense, swampy expanse of the Malayan Peninsula to the north was dismissed as a natural barrier, an impenetrable jungle that no modern army could successfully traverse. This doctrine of geographical complacency blinded the defenders to a rapidly evolving geopolitical reality, leaving the northern backdoor to their impregnable fortress disastrously ajar. Across the Pacific, as World War II engulfed the globe, a different vision of the future was violently taking shape. Imperial Japan was expanding its greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a sprawling dominion requiring immense quantities of rubber, oil, and tin to fuel its relentless war machine. The resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia presented a vital lifeline for a nation suffocating under international embargoes. To secure these resources, the Japanese military command understood that the British stranglehold on the regional waterways had to be broken, setting the stage for a collision of empires that would redefine modern warfare. The illusion of safety evaporated on December 8, 1941, just hours before the attack on Pearl Harbor across the international dateline. Japanese transport ships dropped anchor off the northeastern coast of British Malaya and southern Thailand, disgorging battle-hardened troops directly into the torrential monsoon rains. Instead of facing a frontal assault on their fortified island, British and Commonwealth forces found themselves confronting a highly mobile, fiercely aggressive enemy pushing rapidly down the peninsula. The Malayan campaign had begun, plunging the defenders into a chaotic struggle for survival in an environment they had entirely misjudged. This rapid advance was spearheaded by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, a commander who masterfully adapted the principles of blitzkrieg, a military doctrine emphasizing speed, surprise, and mechanized force, to the unforgiving jungle terrain. Recognizing the limitations of heavy armor in the dense undergrowth, Yamashita deployed thousands of troops on bicycles. This unconventional tactical innovation allowed Japanese infantry to move silently and swiftly along narrow plantation tracks, continually outflanking rigid British defensive lines. When bridges were blown by retreating forces, Japanese soldiers simply waded across rivers carrying their bicycles, maintaining a relentless tempo that paralyzed Allied decision-making. The strategic nightmare deepened just 2 days into the invasion with a catastrophic blow to British naval prestige. Force Z, a naval detachment centered around the formidable battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, was dispatched to intercept the Japanese invasion fleets without adequate air cover. In a stunning display of shifting military paradigms, waves of land-based Japanese torpedo bombers descended upon the unescorted warships, sending both Leviathans to the bottom of the South China Sea. The sinking of Force Z signaled the definitive end of the battleship era and stripped the Malayan Peninsula of its primary naval defense, leaving ground forces entirely exposed to the advancing storm. For the soldiers on the ground, the retreat became a grueling exercise in attrition, a military strategy focused on wearing down the enemy to the point of collapse through continuous losses in personnel and materiel. British, Indian, and Australian troops fought desperate rearguard actions through stifling heat and impenetrable foliage, constantly harassed by enemy snipers and dive bombers. Exhaustion and disease ravaged the ranks as the defenders were pushed inexorably southward, their morale eroding with every mile yielded. The myth of the impenetrable jungle had been turned against them, transforming the peninsula into a green hell of ambush and continuous withdrawal. By the end of January, the battered remnants of the defending army crossed the causeway linking the peninsula to the island of Singapore, immediately blowing a massive hole in the structure behind them. The fortress was now under siege, but its heavy naval guns, supplied largely with armor-piercing shells designed for ship-to-ship combat, were grossly ineffective against infantry mustering in the jungle across the narrow Johor Strait. The defenders prepared for a final stand along a sprawling, poorly coordinated perimeter, their command structure fractured by internal disputes and a creeping sense of inevitability. General Yamashita, acutely aware that his own forces were dangerously overextended and running critically low on ammunition, recognized that a protracted urban battle could spell disaster for his campaign. He shifted his focus to the island's critical infrastructure, launching a concentrated assault to capture the central reservoirs. By seizing control of the water supply, the Japanese command effectively placed a ticking clock on the survival of the millions of civilians and soldiers trapped within the shrinking perimeter. The control of logistics, the complex coordination of moving and supplying forces, had shifted irrevocably to the attackers, forcing a devastating ultimatum upon the defenders. The breaking point arrived on February 15, 1942, a day that would echo in infamy across the British Empire. Faced with a desperate water shortage, dwindling ammunition, and the horrifying prospect of a civilian massacre in the streets of the city, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival made the agonizing decision to capitulate. Marching under a white flag to the Ford Motor Factory, Percival formally surrendered his command of over 80,000 troops to General Yamashita. It was the largest capitulation of British-led forces in history, a staggering humiliation executed in a matter of weeks by an enemy force less than half their size. The immediate aftermath plunged the surrendered forces and the local population into an abyss of brutality. Tens of thousands of British, Australian, and Indian prisoners of war were marched into captivity at Changi Prison, beginning a multi-year ordeal of forced labor, starvation, and systemic abuse. The occupation forces simultaneously unleashed a reign of terror upon the civilian population, particularly targeting the ethnic Chinese community in a series of massacres designed to eradicate any potential resistance. The impregnable fortress was transformed into an island of profound suffering, its former masters reduced to emaciated laborers toiling under the banner of the rising sun. Beyond the immediate human catastrophe, the surrender fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of global geopolitics. As Winston Churchill famously declared, it was the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. For centuries, the ideological justification for colonial rule rested heavily on the perceived invulnerability and inherent superiority of the European powers. The sudden, total collapse of the empire's greatest eastern bastion at the hands of an Asian power shattered this illusion instantaneously and irreparably. The psychological chains of colonialism were broken long before the political ones would follow. The echoes of that capitulation resonated deeply across Southeast Asia, fueling a profound nationalist awakening. Local populations, witnessing the utter humiliation of their colonial overlords, realized that European dominance was neither natural nor permanent. Guerrilla warfare, a form of irregular combat where small groups of combatants use military tactics including ambushes and sabotage to fight a larger and less mobile traditional military, began to take root among resistance movements. Leaders who would later spearhead independence struggles absorbed a critical lesson. The colonial masters could be defeated, and the destiny of Asia belonged to its own people. When British forces finally returned to reclaim the island following the Japanese surrender in 1945, they found a territory irrevocably transformed. The Union Jack was raised once more, but the moral and military authority it once represented had evaporated. The colonial administration attempted to reassert control, yet they were met by a populace emboldened by wartime resistance and deeply disillusioned by the failure of their former protectors. The era of unquestioned imperial dominion had concluded, and a new era of negotiated withdrawals and fierce independence struggles had begun. The strategic vacuum left by the diminished British presence rapidly became a theater for a new kind of global struggle. As the world transitioned into the Cold War, a prolonged period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies, the newly emerging nations of Southeast Asia navigated a treacherous landscape of proxy wars. A proxy war occurs when major powers instigate or play a major role in a conflict but use third parties to do the fighting directly. The fall of the colonial order, catalyzed by the events of 1942, cleared the board for these new ideological battles, fundamentally shifting the center of global strategic gravity. The capitulation of the Gibraltar of the East stands as a stark monument to the peril of strategic arrogance and the suddenness with which history can turn. It is a testament to how an empire's strength can become its ultimate vulnerability when rigid doctrine blinds it to evolving threats. The loss of the island was the catalyst that unraveled a global hegemony, proving that no fortress is truly impregnable and no empire is eternal. The events of those 70 days did not merely end a campaign. They decisively shifted the eras, burying the old imperial world and forcing the violent, rapid birth of the modern Asian landscape.